Did she just slap her? That sharp sound cut through the stunned silence. The glass of wine hovered unplaced on the table, and Rachel's cheek flushed bright red from the unexpected slap delivered by the wealthiest guest in the VIP room. Everyone froze. A few exchanged glances, a handful raised their phones, but no one intervened. No one stepped forward. Only a humiliated waitress stood there. Was that worth anyone's concern? Rachel stood motionless, fighting back tears. But just seconds later, a deep voice rang out from the doorway, changing the atmosphere in the entire room. "Touch my wife again, and I swear you'll regret it." All of it began with a soft crack, not from a gun nor from an argument, but the sound of a hand striking a young waitress's cheek, ringing clear through the lavish room where every detail screamed money. No one had time to react. Forks hung suspended in midair. A few eyes slowly shifted toward the source of the sound, but no one stood up. Rachel Monroe stood frozen, her face tilted to one side, the red imprint of the slap still vivid on her skin. In her hand was an empty silver tray. Across the table sat a woman with an unreadable expression. Clarissa Devereaux, the very emblem of high society and an ego untouchable. She did not shout or scold. She merely lifted her chin slightly, her gaze sweeping over Rachel as though the waitress had just left a speck of dust on a Persian silk rug. All because of one glass of champagne. Not cold enough. Everyone saw it, yet no one truly saw. Rachel did not move. Her head throbbed. Questions crashed through her mind like waves on the shore. How many people witnessed my humiliation? What should I say? What should I do? And then the answer became clearer than ever. Nothing. Because she was staff. Because this was Tribeca. Because she was only part of the backdrop for those deemed worthy of service. From a table in the back, a man shook his head. To her left, a couple feigned ignorance. An older woman clicked her tongue, then bent to lift a piece of salmon topped with caviar. The shame drifted away like a breeze through the curtains, light yet chilling to the bones of the one it touched. Rachel's cheek burned, not just from the force of the slap, but from the silence. She wanted to leave, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. Not out of fear of losing her job, but from the humiliation, as if turning away would mean admitting she deserved that slap. And she did not. Something inside her began to crack. Not pride, she'd learned to live without it, but belief that if she tried hard enough, was kind long enough, someone would notice. Yet in this room full of fur coats, Italian silk ties, and diamond-studded smiles, no one noticed. Only she stood alone beneath the invisible gaze of those who considered themselves above mere courtesy. Still clutching the tray in one hand and gripping the side of her skirt with the other, Rachel looked up at Clarissa one last time. Not in defiance, but to etch this moment into memory. This was the boundary beyond which she would not be pushed. And somewhere, not far away, someone rose to their feet. Not for the champagne, not for right or wrong, but because someone had finally seen her. Wait, one small favor. Please like this video and subscribe if you love inspiring stories. And don't forget to leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. It means the world to see people from all corners come together to share a single meaningful moment.
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
Silence often follows a shock, but the kind of silence now smothering the room was different. Thick, dense, and heavy enough to be felt on the skin. It radiated from the central table in the VIP room, where Rachel Monroe still stood motionless, and seeped into every corner like an invisible smoke, tightening around the throats of everyone present. Clarissa Devereaux leaned back in her chair, her long fingers gently tracing the rim of her crystal glass. There was no hint of remorse, only a fleeting, triumphant curl at the edge of her smile. To her, that slap wasn't an act of violence, but a disciplinary highlight. a lesson those at the bottom needed to remember their rightful place. Rachel said nothing. Her eyes remained wide open, her face frozen in the moment of exposure. She knew no one would rise to defend her, and she also knew that, like every other time, this feeling would pass. Then everyone would return to their appetizers, to polite laughter and hollow conversations. But this time, that wouldn't happen. A deep voice cut through the air like a stone dropped onto a still lake. Touch my wife again and see what happens. No volume was needed, no anger required. The power lay elsewhere, in the bone-chilling calm, as if the speaker fully understood the weight of every word spoken. Everyone turned almost simultaneously. A wave of tension coursed through the room. No one knew who he was, yet everyone sensed exactly who he was. He didn't hurry, but each step he took toward Rachel made the atmosphere grow denser. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored. His dark green tie knotted to perfection. His polished leather shoes not bearing a speck of dust. But it was his gaze that stole every breath. Cold, profound, and utterly unforgiving. Damian Cross. The name flickered in the recognition of a few. CEO of CrossTech, owner of the largest real estate chain in Lower Manhattan. The Man magazines called the anonymous millionaire because he shunned the limelight, yet controlled much of the world where the wealthy gathered. He offered no introduction. None was needed. He strode directly to Rachel's side. No one blocked him. No one spoke. It was as if the entire room had parted like water to let his presence through. Without a word of permission or unnecessary gesture, Damian placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder. The motion carried no possessiveness, only a statement. She was not alone. Rachel trembled, not from fear, but from the shock. To have someone stand by her after being torn apart in front of so many felt so surreal she wondered if it was real or a cruel trick of her mind. Damian fixed his gaze on Clarissa, neither raising an eyebrow nor altering his tone. He didn't need to. Simply standing there, he had already tilted her world off its familiar axis. Then he spoke in a voice even and sharp as a knife's edge. I saw everything, and you treated my wife like she wasn't even human. His words dropped into the room like a verdict. Not an apology, nor an excuse. They were fact, definition, and boundary. From this moment on, anyone who touched Rachel Monroe would have to answer to Damian Cross. Clarissa froze. For the first time, she said nothing in return. Silence no longer stood with her. It had switched sides, and when silence changes sides, those who once believed themselves untouchable begin to feel a chill down their spine. Clarissa Devereaux had never been one to back down. In the most expensive rooms in the city, her voice often drowned out those bearing the names Rothschild or Vanderbilt. No one dared humiliate Clarissa. She commanded a network powerful enough to crush anyone's reputation within 3 days, if she so wished. But in that moment, when the man named Damian Cross stepped forward and called the very waitress she had slapped my wife, everything within her froze as if a river had solidified in the midst of a snowstorm. The arrogant confidence in Clarissa's eyes began to dissolve, not because Damian raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. Those who truly wield power don't shout. They simply look at you long enough for you to realize you've wandered unknowingly into a chess game that began without your notice. Clarissa stared at him as if searching for a clue that this was some cruel joke. But Damian's expression betrayed no humor. No mocking smirk, no sarcastic curl of the lip. Only the serene gaze of a man accustomed to severing anything that didn't align with his personal code of ethics. A few hushed whispers rippled through the room, quiet, but enough for Clarissa to understand that the balance of power at this gathering had shifted. She was no longer the center of attention. That sharply dressed man with the measured voice had redirected every gaze. And most frightening of all, none of those eyes were on her side anymore. Damian wasted no time. He turned to a nearby server and nodded gently, as if that single gesture would suffice. Within under a minute, 2 men in security uniforms appeared at the VIP room entrance. They didn't need to ask what had happened. They didn't need Damian to explain. They merely stood there, silent and waiting for orders, as though trained specifically to deal with those who believe themselves above the law. Clarissa took a step back. For the first time that evening, her heel caught. The face she so meticulously maintained with luxury cosmetics now looked pale beneath her foundation. She glanced around for allies, a sympathetic look, an approving furrowed brow. But all she found was distance. Not everyone dared challenge Clarissa, but clearly no one wanted to be dragged down with her. Damien spoke calmly without raising his voice. From now on, you are barred from entering any restaurant, hotel, or golf course owned by the Cross Group. If you attempt otherwise, we will pursue appropriate legal action. The room fell silent, as if everyone were holding their breath to hear this clearly. No one interrupted. No one reminded anyone that Clarissa was still technically a guest, because in their eyes at that moment, she had just been expelled from the very class she believed to belong to. One of the security officers stepped forward with measured certainty, but without brutality. He tilted his head slightly toward Clarissa, communicating the unspoken order. No words were necessary. The intention was abundantly clear. Clarissa remained frozen for a few more seconds, perhaps to gather a shred of dignity, or simply because she had never had to leave like this in her life. She turned away, passing through confused, indifferent, and even gleeful stares. A few guests clicked their tongues, others shrugged, as if watching a film they'd missed the beginning of but were curious to see how it ended. Rachel still stood there, her face impassive. Her cheek remained flushed, not just from the slap, but from the wave of bewilderment flooding her. She didn't understand what was happening. Who was this stranger? Why had he intervened? And most perplexingly, why had he called her my wife? She felt the room's attention shift back to her, but this time it was different. No longer pity or contempt. Now it was curiosity, recognition of change. Clarissa disappeared through the door, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, as if a storm had passed, leaving damp echoes on the polished floor. But at that moment, Rachel realized she was no longer invisible as she had always been. When someone once at the top is brought low, the world doesn't spin out of control. It simply switches roles. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned for the unexpected twists ahead. Comment 1 if you enjoyed this story, so we know you're still here. The lounge was partitioned by frosted glass doors, just enough to block outside noise, yet enough to make the world beyond feel distant. Every element in that room was arranged so meticulously it could make anyone forget they were in a restaurant. Soft leather chairs, ivory silk-covered walls, and lighting so gentle it seemed designed to envelop the person opposite without revealing a single emotion. Rachel sat on the edge of her seat, her back straight, but her hands clasped on her lap, knuckles whitening. She said nothing, partly because she still couldn't grasp what was happening, partly because the mere presence of the man across from her left no room in her mind for coherent thought. Damien Cross, the name that had been a distant mystery mere minutes ago, now sat just a wooden table's length away. He did not rush to speak. There was no sense of a hero saving a damsel in distress, nor any mechanical politeness often displayed by wealthy men. Damien regarded Rachel with the cool detachment of a businessman making a deal, logical, measured, and unyielding. Finally, he spoke. He offered no preamble, no circumlocution. His proposal arrived as unexpectedly as a spring breeze slipping through an unbuttoned coat. A sham marriage lasting 1 year. In return, she would receive $7 million. Rachel's brow furrowed, not in doubt, but as her mind needed a few seconds to process the figure. $7 million. A number so far removed from her reality it was almost meaningless. Enough to erase every debt, enough to redeem lost time, enough to rewrite a beginning unshaped by scarcity. Damien continued, his voice lower now, as though sharing a rare intimacy. He spoke of his mother's will, a woman who, as he put it, believed that power without a heart would ultimately devour itself. She had bequeathed him full ownership of Crosstech on one condition. He must marry and live as an ordinary person for at least 1 year. No privileges, no secluded mansions immune to the world, no remote signings from yacht parties. He was to live, to love, or at least pretend to love, like everyone else. And he had chosen Rachel. Not because she was beautiful, though her gentle features could hold a gaze longer than most. Not because she was pliable, for he had noticed the steadfast resolve in her eyes even after she had been insulted. But because over the past weeks, he had quietly observed her on his covert visits to this restaurant, unnoticed by anyone who knew his true identity. He had seen her smile despite a hand still bleeding from a broken glass. He had seen her endure cruel jibes from those who believed they held the right to be merciless. He had seen her treasure every small tip as though safeguarding a fragment of her life. Rachel did not answer immediately. Her eyes dropped to the tabletop as if seeking an answer in the polished wood grain. Thoughts swirled. Was this offer real? Why her? And why, amid all this madness, did she feel relieved instead of scared? She still did not understand her place in the chess game this man had set. But for the first time in years, she wasn't chosen for her obedience or compliance. She was chosen because someone saw something in her. Rachel's small apartment sat on the 4th floor of a dilapidated building in the Bronx. The paper-thin walls barely muffled the sound of car horns, footsteps thudding in the hallway, or the neighbor's TV blaring the same loop. But to Rachel, it was the only sanctuary, where she could shed her apron, remove her mask of endurance, and breathe like an ordinary person. That night, she arrived home later than usual. The air inside felt colder than ever, not from the temperature, but from the aftershock of what had occurred in that opulent VIP room, still pounding in her chest like a low, relentless drum. She didn't flip the light switch. Instead, she let the dim glow of the street lamp filtering through the window smear across the walls like her unresolved doubts. The worn fabric chair groaned as she sank into it, her legs limp as if they'd carried her through a journey far longer than any shift before. Yet the fatigue wasn't in her body, it was in her mind under the weight of questions silently knocking at her thoughts. Damian Cross, the stranger who emerged just as she was about to break, the man who'd made an offer that belonged in novels, a year of sham marriage in exchange for financial freedom she'd never dared imagine. But what stunned Rachel most wasn't the $7 million. It was why he'd chosen her, a girl most of the world didn't even notice. She wondered, what was it about her that made someone like him pause? Were the very things she saw as weaknesses, her patience, compassion, the way she stood tall in the face of contempt, the proof that earned his trust? An old clock ticked softly on the windowsill. Rachel slipped off her scuffed heels and pressed her bare feet to the floor, feeling the night breeze drift through the crack. In that moment, she thought of her father, the man who'd raised her with rough hands and simple dinners. Before he died, he'd told her something she'd never forgotten. You can't choose where you start, but you can choose where you end. At the time, she hadn't grasped the full meaning. She'd thought it mere comfort. But now, sitting in this cramped room with the future flung open like a door in a storm, she felt the weight of his words. She could refuse, keep working 10-hour days penny by penny, striving to be good in a world that didn't care. Or she could place her bet, not for the money, but for hope. That just once in her life, she'd allow herself to step beyond her comfort zone and touch something greater than the fate she'd accepted. That night, Rachel didn't sleep. She sat for hours watching the faint light outside shift from gold to pale blue. When the first ray of dawn kissed the windowsill, she rose, neither hurried nor hesitant. She pulled on an old sweater, retrieved her chipped corner phone, and dialed the number Damian had given her. The line rang only 3 times before he answered. No introductions, no good morning, just 3 words, gentle but resolute, like an inner door swung open. I accept. A year passed like a held breath deep within the chest. Slow, steady, yet full of change. From those first days of maintaining a quiet distance in a penthouse so vast it could make 2 people feel worlds apart, Rachel and Damien gradually learned to exist within each other's orbit. It began with schedules, then with how they met each other's gaze as they stepped onto red carpets. Smiles rehearsed before mirrors, timely, gentle gestures, just enough to catch the camera's eye. It was all a performance, so flawless that every magazine hailed them as the golden couple of the tech world. But what happened behind the closed door, no one ever knew. Damien, once a man ruled by meetings and numbers, found himself gently reshaped by the invisible kindness Rachel carried. He grew accustomed to the morning hiss of her coffee machine, to the faint scent of cinnamon she used to freshen the room, to the way she looked at him when no one else was watching, not judging, not admiring, simply seeing him as a person. And Rachel, who had believed there was no place in this world for girls from walk-ups without elevators, began to change too. She discovered silent moments with Damien where she didn't have to strive to be accepted. There, she didn't have to hide her wounds, stifle her anger, or conceal her small wish to step into the world as herself. Though it was only a year by contract, each passing day felt like a lesson in presence, not to serve, but to live. Then, the unpredicted happened. Emotions stepped beyond the script. Damien couldn't pinpoint exactly when everything shifted. Perhaps the moment he saw Rachel standing in the kitchen at midnight, wearing his shirt, drinking water while reading her handwritten notes on charitable foundations. Or maybe it was when he realized he slept truly soundly only when he heard the soft click of her returning home. Feelings didn't arrive like a flood, they came like a night rain, persistent, gentle, soaking in without warning. And Rachel? She no longer counted the days until the contract ended, because she understood that some things cannot be measured by time, like how he discreetly placed a hand on her back during a crowded event, or how his gaze followed her when he thought no one noticed. When winter returned to the city, it was also time for Crosstech's year-end shareholders meeting. Media buzzed that Damien would sell the company, fulfill his mother's will, and step out from her shadow to begin a new chapter. The meeting room was lined with light walnut paneling, a long table streaming data across multiple screens. Damien sat at its head, quietly studying familiar faces. Rachel sat beside him, her ivory dress simpler than ever, yet her eyes never left him. When it was his turn to speak, Damien stood, no script, no prompting from an assistant. His voice rang clear yet softer, closer. He spoke of numbers, markets, responsibilities, then paused, looked at Rachel and said, "I intended to announce the sale of Crosstech today, but I will not do that, because thanks to this woman, I've come to understand what my mother always hoped I would realize. Family is not a condition. It is a gift." No one spoke. No one needed to. The room seemed to take a collective pause. Rachel turned to him, her lips trembling, and tears began to fall, each one as gentle as spring rain on parched earth. Not for the money, not for the title, but because for the first time in her life, she wasn't chosen for convenience. She was chosen because she was seen, recognized, loved. Life may test us in the most unexpected ways, sometimes through humiliation, sometimes through loneliness, sometimes with a slap we'd rather forget. Yet it is often that very worst moment that becomes the beginning of the greatest miracle. Rachel's story proves that you don't need noble birth to be loved sincerely. You don't need power to be respected. You only need to hold on to kindness even when others ignore it. And if today you feel invisible, lost, or wounded, remember that you can start anew, no matter what your past has been. There is someone out there who sees you not for how you look, but for how you stand firm when everything seems to want you to fall. Sometimes the most humiliating pain is the door to an extraordinary life. Never underestimate the power of resilience, and never stop believing in the miracle called a second chance. If this story moved you, tap the heart, leave a comment below, and share it with someone who needs healing. Don't forget to follow the channel, Who knows, the next story might be exactly what you need to hear today.